Okay, I think we should get started. Thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Really pleased to have you here. A very quick introduction from myself. So my name is Ahmed Masood. I'm the Director of International Partnerships at Regent's University London, and I have the pleasure of hosting you this evening. So I'll be your host this evening. I won't talk much, don't worry. I've got fantastic speakers lined up for you. So I'm looking forward to listening to them as much as you are. Before we get started and before I introduce my speakers, just a few housekeeping rules. Please keep your mic off unless when you get to ask a question, you can turn your mic on later on. There will be a Q&A session at the end for about 20 minutes. The event will be about 50 minutes in total, the conversation between Lorna and Carolyn. It will last about 50 minutes and then we'll move to a Q&A session, at which point you can ask your question if you want to. You can pop your questions in the chat and we've got people, my colleagues will be picking them up and bring them to the attention of the speakers later on. Also, just to remind everybody that this event is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, just stay on mute and don't turn your camera on. I think that's all the housekeeping in a virtual event. Usually we would say the toilets are on the right or on the left, but I suppose you know where they are because you're sitting at home. Anyway, enough from me. Thanks again for joining us this evening. This event is organized by Regent's University London and Keele University, and I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers today. First, let me introduce Lorna Lloyd, who is a research fellow at Keele University and has an extensive experience in international diplomacy and has written extensively about it. And Carolyn Davidson, I will leave the introduction for later on because the CV is massive and I won't give her justice in there. But just wanted to say very quickly that this event is not about the UK foreign policy. So we're not discussing the UK foreign policy and what it means and the changes in it, etc. It really is about working in the diplomatic sector and what it means to work for the Foreign Office and to live in different places, etc. And it's not also about becoming a 007 agent, if that's what you thought. If that's what you wanted, then you are in the wrong event. Anyway, I'll hand over now to Lorna, to our speakers, and I will see you later at the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ahmed. First, I want to thank Toshi for wonderful, exhaustive work he's done in setting this up and arranging it. I'd also like to thank Ahmed for the introduction, Paul of Regents, Yuko and Yunko for being able to help with the recording and make sure we get a recording of this meeting so people can watch it later. And Carolyn, it's wonderful to have you here. When I was teaching diplomatic studies, as I said a couple of days ago, it was I could teach the practicalities. We could learn why diplomats have immunity. We could learn what the Vienna Convention says and whether the US Embassy is breaking the Vienna Convention by recording pollution in Beijing. But what is so difficult is to actually convey what the job is like, what it feels like to be a diplomat, how you become it, how your careers progress, the rewards and the costs of being a diplomat. And hopefully Carolyn will shed some light on it. She does have a very interesting career. She joined the then Foreign Commonwealth Office in 1986 and most recently served as ambassador to Guatemala and Honduras, and before that as High Commissioner to Zambia. She shared these roles with her husband, Tom Carter, who is also an FCO diplomat. And they were the first UK job-sharing heads of mission in Zambia. She's also had postings in Tokyo, Brussels, Bonn, Bangkok, Bratislava, as well as various roles in London. So I really am very grateful to you for finding time to share your expertise and your knowledge with us. The first thing to ask is, of course, what attracted you to joining the FCO? What was it that made you think, oh yes, I'd like to do that, and that you stood a chance for getting in? I can't hear you.
You really failed the first test of the technology. Apologies for that. What attracted me to joining the Foreign Office was the opportunity to spend time, I mean, decent chunks of time in a foreign country and actually get to know that country properly, as opposed to doing an international related job, which might involve, you know, very glamorous lifestyle of hopping on a plane and going off to lots of international meetings, but you would never actually get to know the place that you were living. And I think I realized that after my year abroad. I did French and German at university and spent half a year in France and half a year in Germany, and realized that during that period, I'd got to know far more about those countries, about the people who lived there, and about the way that people thought, and also how they viewed the UK. I'd learned far more about that by actually living there and speaking the language than I would have done from any amount of time spent, you know, reading newspapers or books or you know, listening to stuff in the UK. So I think it was that opportunity. How did I think I had a chance of getting in? Well, I'm not sure I did, but I thought, you know, I've got more of a chance if I apply than if I don't. So I did apply. I have to say, when I was offered the role in my final year at university, I remember commenting to one of my fellow students at Bristol that I was off to join the Foreign Office. And they just looked at me in complete incomprehension and said, "But you've got a northern accent and spiky hair. How on earth can you be joining the Foreign Office?" So I think, you know, even then there were preconceptions about the sort of people who joined the Foreign Office, and I was very glad to be, you know, breaking those preconceptions.
Could you say something about the recruitment process? Because it's, at least for an outsider, it can seem rather opaque. What actually do you do to join the FCDO, as it now is?
Well, I think at the moment, the only way to join the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office is through the fast stream recruitment process. And there are, you can join either as through the diplomatic fast stream or the economics fast stream. And to do that, you need to have, I think for the diplomatic, you need to have a 2-2 degree. For the economics, you need to have a 2-1 degree in an economics subject, or a subject that's got at least 50% economics. And you have to be a British national, and to have spent, I think, 2 of the last 5 years actually living in the UK. And it's also open to people who are dual nationals, so you don't have to be only British. But I think, you know, there are, I'm not familiar with the actual process today. There's lots of information if you go on the gov.uk website about the process. It generally starts in about September or October the year before, for entry in September, October the following year. So it's quite a long process. And yes, you know, lots of people want to apply, lots of people are interested. But, you know, if you don't apply, you have a 0 chance of getting in. So, you know, it's always worth a try.
Related to that, what degree subjects is the FCDO looking for? I note that you have a degree in French and German, and international relations students sometimes think that, oh yeah, well, because we've studied international relations, we'll automatically be ahead of the field, but that's not the case, is it?
No, I mean, the Foreign Office is not looking for any particular discipline at degree level. I did French and German. I have colleagues who did physics. I have colleagues who did history or classics or philosophy or engineering. You know, there is no subject which means that you are, you know, better or worse fit for joining the Foreign Office. So I think the things that are important are that you have a curiosity for the world around you and for the people around you, that you have a mind that's focused on learning and being quick to learn, that you are resilient, and that you are a good team player. Those are the things that are really important. But what subject you studied at university really isn't. It's the rigor of the process of getting your degree which matters more, and the self-discipline which goes with that, more than the actual subject that you studied.
And once you get into the FCDO, how much choice do you have? Did you choose to learn Japanese? Do you have choice in posting and say, well, I'd like to go to Washington or Hawaii or whatever?
Yes, it used to be called the dream sheet. It used to be a piece of paper that came around with a list of postings on, and it would be called a dream sheet. It's not quite like that anymore. I mean, I think if you join the fast stream, there is a very clear process where you will spend 2 years working in London, and then you will go and do a job overseas, and then you will come back to London. But in terms of where you will go overseas, there are vacancies advertised across the Foreign Office, and you apply for those vacancies in the same way you would apply for any other job, and you have to beat the competition. So that's how it now works these days. So you have to you'll sign up when you join the organization for a worldwide mobility clause, which says I'm prepared to go anywhere. But actually, you generally, you will volunteer and apply for the jobs in the places that you want to go to and the jobs that you want to do. As for Japanese, after I joined the Foreign Office, I did the what they call the language aptitude test to see how good you are at learning foreign languages. And unsurprisingly, having spent my degree doing 2, I did quite well on that. And I was offered the opportunity to do what the office classes as a hard language, which at the time they were training people in Japanese, Chinese, and Arabic. And so I was essentially offered a choice of, was I interested in learning any of those languages? I wasn't particularly interested in learning in Arabic. I didn't have any particular drive to go to the Middle East. Chinese was tonal, or is tonal, and I'm tone deaf. So I thought there's absolutely no point in me even trying that. And so Japanese was where I ended up, and it was a great choice. I then spent a year at SOAS University doing Japanese, and then a year at the embassy's own language school in Kamakura. So 2 years of full-time language training, and then worked in the embassy in Tokyo for 3 years after that. And that was my sort of introduction to overseas life in the Foreign Office.
Can we, just sticking with languages for the time being, I'd like to explore how important it is to learn foreign languages. You have German, French, Spanish, Japanese. How useful has it been to know these languages, and what are the joys and benefits and, if you like, travails of doing? Do you get mixed up in what language you're speaking?
Just to answer your last point first, I don't get confused between French and German. Those are always separate. I learnt Spanish recently, I learnt Spanish to go to Guatemala. And so I get that very confused with French. And when I was in Guatemala, I found it completely impossible to speak French. But having said that, when I came back from Guatemala and I restarted learning Japanese, or to refresh my Japanese, after about 2 weeks of Japanese, I'd forgotten all my Spanish. So yeah, it goes in waves. But to answer your question, I mean, languages are important. They're not, the basis on why you will be chosen to join the Foreign Office. So there is no requirement to have a foreign language to join, but clearly having an ability and a willingness to learn are really important. The Foreign Office has its own international academy and a language centre within that, where they will teach multiple languages. And that's where I learned my Spanish, for example. But I think, you know, having the willingness to learn is much more important. I really cannot overestimate the joy and the delight of using your foreign languages overseas. I remember having spent a year in SOAS learning Japanese and spending my first 2 weeks in Japan staying with a Japanese family in Kyushu in the south of Japan. And I was just amazed that the stuff that I'd been learning in a textbook and a classroom in Japan, I could say to these people sitting around this table and they could understand me. And I was able to have a conversation. I mean, it's not, you know, Japanese at that time wasn't like, you know, sort of French and German that you heard around you in Europe. You know, this was a completely alien language from my point of view. So that was a real sort of moment of achievement, I thought. But also, I think, you know, if you don't speak the language, there are a couple of barriers. One is all the information you receive about that country is being filtered. It's being filtered by somebody. Even, you know, if you work in an embassy and, you know, you have a press section who are telling you what's coming up in you know, that country's press or media, then it is being filtered by those people. Now, you know, you might have inordinate trust and respect for those people, but it is still being filtered by them and you are not directly experiencing it. And the other thing is, if you really want to know a country, I think you have to be able to speak the language, because, you know, so much of how we perceive and how we recognize what is happening in the world is, how can I describe this? You know, if you don't speak the language, you can't really understand how people are perceiving what's going on around them. And I think it's incredibly important. And I think it's been, you know, one of the great delights, I think, of my working life, to be able to use languages, you know, outside the classroom, to be able to use them in meetings, to be able to use them when lobbying people, to be able to use them, you know, doing media interviews, or, you know, just talking to, you know, people in everyday walks of life everywhere I've been posted. So I think that's, I really can't overestimate the joy, I don't think.
Is it normal for diplomats to know as many languages as you? I think what I'm really trying to get at is, anybody who's thinking of this, should they expect, yes, I'll have to learn 4 languages and one of them will be a hard language?
No, not at all. I have plenty of colleagues who don't speak any foreign languages, and, you know, there are quite a number of countries in the world, such as USA, Australia, New Zealand, where and, you know, lots of people in the countries in the Commonwealth where, you know, you don't need to speak another language, and the official language is English, and you can do business in English. So no, I mean, I think the fact that I speak 4, and I also learned Slovak as well when I was in Bratislava, you know, is a reflection of the fact that that's the sort of thing that I really enjoy. And I suppose what that demonstrates is that, you know, if you're in the Foreign Office, you can do things that you enjoy, and put those to good use.
Just staying with personal qualities, is the next question is, what kind of people become diplomats? The image of a diplomat in most countries is rather stale. And what extent is the FCDO white, upper class, Oxbridge, male, straight and stuffy?
Okay, well, of all those you've just listed, I think I'm white, but I'm none of the others.
But are you kind of the exception?
No, I'm not the exception. I think, you know, when I joined 30 years ago, then I think, you know, there were probably quite a few people who did fit that mold. I think I cannot think of anybody that I work with today who I would describe as stuffy. You know, I think one of the great things for me about working in the Foreign Office has always been the caliber of people and of colleagues that you work with, and I think increasingly the Foreign Office is much more diverse than it used to be. We are aiming for 50% gender parity. At the moment, I think we're about 45%. For disabled people, I think our aim is 13%, and we're currently at 11%. For LGBT, it's 6%, and we're currently at 5%. And for BAME, I think again it's about 13%, and we're well on the way to doing that. So I think, you know, it is a much more diverse organisation than it used to be, and it's very difficult to say a typical diplomat is, you know, Oxbridge, male, white, stuffy, etc. I think a typical diplomat is, you know, can be anybody, but you have to be, as I said before, you have to be curious, you have to be committed, you have to be resilient, and you have to be willing to learn and be open-minded. I think, you know, all those things, and you have to be interested in people. You know, the Foreign Office and diplomacy at the end of the day is about people. It's about building relationships and networks with people. And if you're not interested in doing that, then the Foreign Office is not for you.
Yeah, I had a friend who, I mean, this is going back to just after the war, but in his first posting, his head of mission told him, go out and make friends. He did that. And of course, so many years later, he knew all the top people in Canadian diplomacy. So
Exactly.
that really paid off.
Yeah.
And sticking to the quality, we've done the languages, the need to like people, but what other qualities are needed? I think the essence of diplomacy is communication. And diplomats' job is really to be skilled communicators, to be able to say things in the right way and know how people will receive them. Is it a job where, while you have to have a certain intellect, as you said, at least a 2-2, the personal qualities are what really matter? You need to be, as you say, curiosity, courage, creativity, resilience, adaptability, perhaps a strong liver to cope with all the whining and dining, and someone who can hit the ground running. I wonder if you could comment on that, because I do think it's a job where the person matters at least as much as the intellect. And I know that all my junior diplomats I taught, they were all actually wonderful people. I really enjoyed them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, all of that you said, I would agree with all of that. I think that the curiosity is really important. The communication is really important. And yes, it's about being able to give messages, but communication is actually as much about listening as it is about talking. And that is a really important skill, knowing, you know, when to listen, who to listen to, building a network of people that are, you know, the people who have the power and the influence within a particular country or region. That's what's really important. And, you know, you might look at an organogram of an organization and say, well, that's the top person, he's the one I need to engage with.
Wow.
But actually, you know, you might, by talking to people and engaging with them, learn that actually he's not the top person. And actually somebody further down the food chain is the one who's really calling the shots because he's got political links with X and Y. And so, you know, you can build your networks of influence that way. Yes, resilient, because, you know, we serve in countries all over the world with very different standards of living and standards of safety and security. I have colleagues working in Kabul, in Baghdad, and you know, they're living under very, very difficult conditions. But similarly, you know, you can be living in somewhere like Japan and thinking that you've you've got a great quality of living, and then a huge earthquake strikes. So you have to deal with that. So I think, you have to be resilient, you have to be self-starting, but also I think the fact that you work in a team really makes a lot of this a lot easier. And certainly from my perspective has always been one of the great things about being in the Foreign Office. You're never on your own. And there's always a friendly face, either in the place where you are or somewhere nearby, who's willing to engage with you.
Just a couple more questions again about the kind of people. I think one thing that has struck me is that diplomats need to have sensitive political antennae. They need to be interested in politics, but you can't afford to have too strong personal convictions, because your job is to execute the instructions given to you by the government. But that leads to a second point that, okay, you mustn't, for example, be completely against nuclear weapons if we are a country that has nuclear weapons. But can you afford to have a conscience as a diplomat? What do you do if you get unpalatable instructions? And I can think of various episodes, and there was the case, of course, of Elizabeth Wilmshurst resigning over the Iraq war invasion. But I think that's the only one I can think of. I could go on others. Anyway, I'm interested in your views.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you have very strong political views, then possibly the life of a civil servant is not for you, because you are there to represent the views of the British government of the day, and they do, they change, and that's what our role is. And I don't think I've not had any experience of unpalatable instructions. I think there are issues where people have been concerned. There are mechanisms within Foreign Office for you to raise concerns if you do feel that you're being asked to do something that goes against what you believe. But again, I think if you're working for the government of a democratic country, and a government that has been democratically elected on a public manifesto, then it's very difficult to actually turn around and say, well, I personally don't agree with that, and okay, the majority of the British population voted this lot in, but I have a different view. That if that's the way you think, then yes, don't join the Foreign Office.
Okay. Moving on, your Consul-General-designate to Osaka. What does that mean? What is the difference between a consulate and an embassy? And what is the difference for you in terms of what you'll be doing in Osaka as compared to if you were in the embassy in Tokyo?
Consulates tend to be in regions outside the capital. We have, consulates in lots of different countries. America, we have them dotted all around, in Australia and Canada and China. In Japan, we just have the one consulate general in Osaka, which, and the reason we have a consulate general is because Osaka is the center of the Kansai, and the Kansai is a huge economic powerhouse in and of itself. I think the Kansai has an economy about the size of the Netherlands. And Osaka City has a GDP the size of New Zealand. So, these are sort of big economic operators. And the trade and investment relationship between the UK and Japan is so important, and many Japanese investors in the UK come from the Kansai region. So I think what the consulate does is, well, what it doesn't do is it doesn't negotiate with the central national government. And that's the difference. So the embassy in Tokyo will be dealing with the various ministries of foreign affairs and economy and defense, whereas consulate will be dealing with subnational government, so prefectures and cities, but also dealing with, many more people, such as universities, research institutes, and across a whole range of areas. That's not to say that the embassy won't be doing that, but the embassy will be doing that on a national level. The consulate needs to have a much greater knowledge about the regional picture. And actually, for the consulate in Osaka, the responsibility I will have will be from sort of Osaka going west, so down to Okinawa in the very south. So covering the whole of that part of Japan. So I think in terms of what the work will be very similar to lots of the work that's being done by the embassy, but with a particular regional and a local focus. It'll be about building relationships. It will be about spotting opportunities for British companies, about encouraging Japanese companies to invest in the UK, about publicising research and development opportunities to various organisations, and about sort of selling the brand of Britain, really, and making sure that people are thinking about Britain and don't forget about us.
Does that mean that there'll be a heavy economic focus on what you'll be doing in Osaka?
Yeah, I think that, there's a heavy trade and investment focus, and but because, as I say, that economic relationship is so important. But there's also a lot of people-to-people links. There are links between, various British universities and Japanese universities, and there are, also, lots of links between, regional areas of the UK and Japan. So, our role is very much to try and develop what already exists, but also look for more opportunities, and fly the flag for Britain.
And can you just give us an idea of what you do? How would say, if there is such a thing as a typical day, how would you spend your time? One has the idea of, I'm thinking the old Ferrero Rocher ad, and I've got more questions to ask about the diplomatic life, but just what do you do?
Well, if I think back to when I was in Guatemala, for example, a typical day could start with a breakfast meeting with the British Chamber of Commerce. So that would be British companies who are active in Japan, or representative of British companies are active in Japan, Guatemalan companies who export to the UK. So having a meeting with them, talking about the issues that are on their agenda, updating them on, the time that I was there, we were negotiating a successor agreement between the UK and Central America to the EU Central America trade agreement. So, updating them on how that was going, and look, trying to find out if there are any particular burning issues that they needed me to know about, and also me, informing them of how the UK government saw various economic developments. After that, I could have a morning of going to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to lobby on any particular issue. While I was there, we had the dreadful case of the Skripal poisoning in Salisbury. Guatemala is is on the executive committee of the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, as was the UK. He spent a lot of time in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs talking to the Guatemalans about how to respond within the OPCW, about Russia's use of chemical weapons on British soil. And then you could have the next thing could be an internal meeting in the embassy, working out what a sort of very sort of small amount of project funds that we have, how we were going to spend that in the year going forwards, for example, on human rights projects, on defending media freedom, on girls' education. And then, you could have, after that, there could be a meeting with other diplomats in Guatemala. We had a group there of the major donors to Guatemala, which was basically the EU countries, plus UK and US and Canada and Switzerland, plus IMF and World Bank. So, you could have a meeting with them and possibly the Guatemalan finance minister to learn what the Guatemalan government is, planning to do around its future financial plans. And then, in the evening, you could have a reception without Ferrero Rocher, I would like to add. But one of the best things that I used to enjoy in Guatemala was our send-off reception for Chevening scholars. Chevening scheme is a scheme whereby the British government pays for overseas students to do a master's degree at a British university. It's an all expenses paid scholarship. It's really sought after. We used to send about 4 or 5 from Guatemala every year, and we would invariably have an event at the residence to send them off. And it was great to see these young people who would invariably come with their families, and possibly 1 or 2 of their teachers or professors who'd encourage them to do the application, all very excited about the year ahead and travelling off to the UK to study at a British university to do, public policy or environmental management. And I should just say that the other great event we used to do is when they came back after their year abroad, and we would, learn from them what they had discovered about Britain, and they would sort of tell us about their experiences. But the positivity and the excitement was always a great. I found that one of the best things that we ever got involved in.
Yeah, I've taught several of the Chevening scholars, and yeah, they're wonderful people. I'm mindful that I've got lots of questions. The time is going very fast. I knew I had too many questions. So, diplomatic life, it's a very privileged life. I don't think we've got time to go into that. But there's 2 points, I think, or 3, that I'd like you to comment on briefly. One is that as a diplomat, you're never your own person. Everything you do, everything you say will be taken as a reflection on the government. How does that feel? Secondly, family life. How does it feel for your children to be educated? I know the government pays for boarding school in Britain, but you've got 2 sons and they're away from you a lot of the time. And thirdly, could you say something about the dangers of being a diplomat? It is a dangerous profession. You're, again, a symbol of the UK, and we have had ambassadors assassinated simply by virtue of being a British ambassador.
Yeah, I mean, on your first point about never being yourself, I think that applies more to ambassadors and heads of mission than it necessarily does to people when you're first starting out in the organization. I have to say, when I was first working in the embassy in Tokyo, I really did not feel that I was out there representing the British government every waking hour of every day. I was certainly enjoying being in Japan, but you know, I had a professional life as well. I think the two become more merged the more senior you become, and I think the more experience you have, the better you get at it, in terms of separating these things out. Different people cope in different ways, and yeah, I mean, I think it's still possible to have personal friends, but you know, if you are there as the British ambassador, then ultimately, you know, that is your role, and that's what you have to sort of focus on for the time that you are in that country. And you know, when I was in Zambia, for example, you know, the British High Commissioner had quite a high profile. I remember going into a you know, remote coffee shop at one stage between Lusaka and Kitwe, and the owner saying to me, "Oh, you know, now that so and so's died, you're the most famous person who comes here." And so you know, you can't, if you're in the country that you're posted to, yes, you know, you have a role, but you know, I like to think that actually representing Britain isn't necessarily a huge burden. Actually, there are lots of countries that it would be much more difficult to represent. Family life, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, you know, I feel very lucky to have had the opportunity, and I think my kids feel very lucky to have had the opportunity to have lived in so many different places, and I think they have a very broad outlook, from the way that they have been brought up and what they have seen and experienced along the way. You know, you don't have to send your kids to boarding school. We ended up doing so, you know, at a later stage, because you know, that was how it manifested, how it sort of developed. Wasn't necessarily our plan at the time, but you know, that's how it was. Lots of colleagues, you know, are able to you know, plan their postings in a way so that the timing is such that they don't. And certainly, you know, our kids were, you know, came on 3 different postings with us and went to international schools in those 3 different postings. So and I think, you know, their education was all the better and the broader for doing that. But yes, I think particularly, you know, this past year has been horrendously difficult for lots of Foreign Office families, who have been separated from family and with all. But you know, I think that's the same for lots of people everywhere. But I feel particularly that that is the case for Foreign Office families over the last year. And your final point about danger, yeah, there is danger. There's danger. There's danger everywhere. I mean, there are risks that you take, but nobody in the Foreign Office ever knowingly puts themselves at risk, and the organisation is always working to make sure that you are safe and secure. So I think, you know, the Guatemala, if you read the travel advice for Guatemala, very few British tourists would actually go, because it emphasizes a lot of the risks. We lived there for 4 years and never had any issue at all around safety and security, because you know, yes, we were lucky, but also we took sensible precautions. If you take sensible precautions, then you can, you know, live very sort of safely and securely. Having said that, I mean, you mentioned colleagues who have been assassinated, and you know, or the consulate general in Istanbul, which was bombed. So yeah, I mean, I'm not suggesting that these things don't happen, but they are not generally, top of your mind every working day.
Okay, I've still got lots to cover, but we don't have time. But if I could just have 5 more minutes to ask about job sharing. As you know, this is absolutely fascinating. Your husband is also a diplomat. You shared the job of being deputy head of mission in Bratislava. Then you job shared as High Commissioner to Zambia. And then you spent 2 years as non-resident ambassador to Honduras, living in Guatemala, where your husband was ambassador. And then you switched jobs and he went to Honduras. 3 questions on that. Why did you want to job share? I think I know the answer, but I'd like to hear what you say. Secondly, how was the proposal received by the FCO when you put it to them? Did they welcome it or what? I'd like to know that. And thirdly, how exactly did you job share? Did it work well?
So on the first question, we decided to job share after we'd been in Bangkok, and our second son was born while we were in Bangkok. We were in Bangkok for my husband's job, not for mine. I would take maternity leave. And we were looking at what to do next after Thailand. And Tom and I were both the same grade in the Foreign Office. And actually, it was Tom's idea. And he said, why don't we suggest to the Foreign Office that we job share a role? Because what we didn't want was to go, I mean, it is possible in the Foreign Office to be posted to an embassy and both of you have a job in that embassy. I mean, they tend to be the bigger embassies, but you could both have a full-time job in an embassy or a consulate overseas. That wouldn't be a problem. But if you did that, our children were at the time sort of 4 and 5. We didn't really want that because overseas jobs tend to be pretty full on and they don't necessarily finish at sort of 5 or 6 o'clock every day. And then so if we didn't do that, the alternative was that one of us worked and the other one didn't work. And again, that didn't strike us as being a great solution, because then you have one person who's working flat out and one person who's at home looking after the children, also probably working flat out, not necessarily getting paid for it, and certainly not getting any career progression or development on the base of that. It's not difficult to sort of think of people who have done that and have ended up with one person feeling very happy and fulfilled because they're doing a great job that they love, and the other feeling a bit sort of out of sorts. So we didn't want that. And we thought if we job shared, then we could share the time between, looking after the kids and working. And so just to cut to your sort of third question next, as it were, the way we did it was we shared on a basis of 4 months on and 4 months off. So one of us would work full time for 4 months, and then the other would work full time for 4 months. And there were a variety of reasons we did that. One was that we thought if we did the sort of traditional job share arrangement of 2.5 days every week, and swapping every week, we'd probably end up either sort of dead or divorced by the end of it, because you would never get away from the job, and it would be really quite difficult. And it would also be quite difficult for the people you were working with, who wouldn't really know who was in charge of what. So we thought if we did 4 months, it would be very clear that you were in charge for those 4 months. And people would know who to turn to in that period. It would be very clear, if something happened during those 4 months, it was your responsibility. And things that happened during that time, you could just get on and do them. And things that, looked like they were sort of more long-term decisions you had to make, then you would discuss them with the other person. And it also meant that, you had 4 months sort of with the kids at home. And you could get into a routine with them and get to know, the other parents, and get more involved in that side of life, and have time. And I have to say that 4 months on, 4 months off period was just fantastic. It It was like, you know, it was sort of the end of 4 months thinking, great, you know, I've now got a break. You know, and sometimes the break was going back to work and sometimes the break was going home, but or being at home, but it, you know, it worked very well. In answer to your question about how it was received by the Foreign Office, they were absolutely, you know, all for it. I think lots of people, when we first talked about it, when we were doing it, couldn't believe that the Foreign Office was doing it because, as you say, of this sort of slightly stuffy, slightly staid reputation. But, you know, Foreign Office human resources people have generally never been like that. Very flexible, very willing to try new things, very keen to do family-friendly policies. And the other, you know, the great thing for what we were suggesting was it wasn't going to cost the Foreign Office any more money than it would to send, you know, one of us. You know, they still have to provide a house and you know, fly us all out there and that sort of thing. So that the costs were no different, possibly some extra training because we were both working, but then, you know, we would both be there. And it also meant that, you know, if you worked in a small post, then you have suddenly, you know, more resilience built into that post because you have more trained people there. And you have, you know, you have two heads are generally better than one at problem solving. So it worked really well. It worked really well for us. We were both able to do our MBA with the Open University during that period because the, you know, children grew up and didn't need quite as much managing as they got older. And I think it worked for the Foreign Office because, as I said, it had this problem solving capability as well. I should just point out that, you know, we were the first ones to do it. There have been others in the Foreign Office who have done it. And now the French and the Germans are also doing it. So, but they don't often mention that they've copied it from the Brits, but they have.
Thank you very, very much, Carolyn. It's been absolutely fascinating. And as I say, I could keep going for a long time, but it's time to let other people have a say.
Brilliant. Thank you both, Carolyn and Lorna. Thank you so much. Brilliant questions. But I can also see a lot of other brilliant questions from the participants in the chat. So let me introduce my colleague, Paul Baker from Regent's University London as well. He's just going to talk us through some of these questions. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Ahmed. How are you? We've got loads of questions. I'm afraid there's far too many for us to cover all of them. So I've grouped some of them together, but we'll try and get through with the limited time we have left as many as possible. Lots on how you got into it in the first place, lots on languages, of course. Some about how often you travel first class, but we'll talk about later.
Never.
Well, you know, definitely the Ferrero Rocher concept is out of the window. But bringing us back on, hopefully on a slightly more serious note, we've talked about people being able to apply both, you know, sort of before they graduate and after they graduate. In your experience, do you think it's better to perhaps wait until after you graduate, go and get some other work experience first before applying?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it certainly doesn't do you any harm. And I think, you know, if that then gives you more sort of evidence on your CV of things that you have done, then that has to be a good thing. I think the days of, you know, doing what I did, which is join the Foreign Office immediately after graduating, and, you know, and stay throughout your working life, I think, you know, those days are probably long gone. So I think, you know, most people are looking at having a career that, you know, dips in and out of very different things. So if I would encourage people to think about the skills that they want and they need and want to develop. And there is certainly no, you know, nothing, the Foreign Office would never take the view, well, we don't want you because you've been doing X and Y and you're too old or anything like that. You know, that really doesn't apply. You know, I have colleagues who, you know, previously worked as barristers and then joined the Foreign Office after that, or have worked as, you know, chartered accountants and then joined. So you know, there's no suggestion that it's going to do you any harm. But again, it just depends on your sort of circumstances and what you want to do.
And it sounds like there's a few people asking similar questions, because here's another one. Is there likelihood, or is it easier to perhaps move from another government department into your area? Is that a
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, if you apply to the civil service fast stream, you are applying to the civil service, and then I think you can nominate, you know, which bit of the civil service you want to join, and you know, lots of people put the Foreign Office as their top choice. There are you know, we encourage interchange within the Foreign Office. So with other Whitehall departments, so there are people from other Whitehall departments who work in the Foreign Office, but you know, it is more difficult. I mean, you might come in for a particular job because you might have the skills that are needed for that particular job. It would be, I think, more difficult to then, you know, move on to several other jobs within the organisation. But again, I don't think it's ruled out. It's difficult to say. You know, we've just had the merger with DFID. We've now become the FCDO. We're currently working on what our workforce strategy needs to look like for the future. So I can't say hand on heart, this is how it is and this is how it isn't. It's very much a sort of fluid concept at the moment.
No, absolutely. And if you are one of the many that have joined us this evening and you're not a British national, are there perhaps other jobs that they can get involved with other than actually just being a diplomat?
In the Foreign Office itself, there are some roles that are the home civil servants. Obviously, you know, those don't involve going overseas. Or, you know, there are jobs that are in our embassies and consulates overseas as a country-based member of staff. So, you know, the vast majority of people who work for the Foreign Office are not British because, you know, 2/3 of our workforce is country-based. For example, you know, in the embassy and consulate in Japan, a lot of them are Japanese. Some of them are British. But they happen to be living in Japan and they are employed as country-based staff. So, you know, there are opportunities in overseas embassies. But again, you know, that would be to work in a particular embassy, not to, you know, be moving around every few years as I have done.
No, excellent. We've obviously talked earlier about languages being such a large part of your experience and background. One of the questions is, do you have any special resources that you've gone to, perhaps, or is it just purely been learning on the job?
I can't think of any particular resources. I think it's got a lot easier. I think, you know, technology has made it all so much easier. You know, I can now watch the Japanese news on my laptop and, you know, listening to local Japanese radio stations, sitting in my kitchen, the sort of thing that was just not possible before. So I think, you know, technology and, you know, just being able to do so much online has made it a lot easier to access that sort of material. But I have to say I'm still pretty old-fashioned in the way I learn stuff, but you know, that's an age thing. I have my vocab lists, I have my dictionaries, I have my kanji book that I started with 30 odd years ago and I still use. And you know, those who are learning Japanese today talk about apps, and I go, no, I've just got a book.
Well,
so
as a man that just about has mastered English, I wouldn't dare any other languages. So I take my hat off. But staying on the languages theme, one of the questions is around regional dialects. So is that ever something that you've got to get involved in, or is it very much we learn sort of just the classic version of each language?
No, it's very much, you know, if that's what's going to be needed for where you're going to be, then that is what you will learn. You know, when I went to Central America, I learned, you know, Latin American Spanish, not Castilian Spanish that they you know, speak in the European mainland of Spain. So, you know, you will learn the obviously in some places, you know, when I go to Osaka, Osaka is renowned for having a different accent. The Kansai Ben is very different from the Tokyo accent. And, you know, with a bit of help from my excellent Japanese teachers here, I've been trying to get to grips with some of that. I expect it will get a lot easier when I'm there on the ground. But yeah, it is something that you you will need to get to grips with. But it's also one of those things that, you know, if you make the effort to speak a regional accent, then that also just, you know, instantly wins you friends and appreciation in the place that you've gone to. You know, you could say, oh, well, you know, the national language is X and I speak X, and, you know, you should all be able to understand me. But, you know, when I was in Guatemala, I learned, you know, I was able to use some fairly basic phrases from some of the indigenous languages in Guatemala. And it, you know, it's a way of showing respect to the communities that you're visiting, to make that sort of effort. But, you know, and it helps, it opens doors, it makes things easier. And, you know, diplomacy is all about making things easier.
Excellent. So we've talked about, obviously, there's just one last question for the, I suppose, for the sort of the younger years as a diplomat. What's the split between perhaps the time you have to spend in the United Kingdom? I mean, you've been lucky enough to be all these fantastic locations, but what is the split between perhaps UK based and when you're overseas? And is it London based or is it regionally in the UK?
So far, just to answer the sort of second point first, so far, when in the UK, it's always been London. That's now changing. You know, now we have merged with DFID, and so we have the office in Abercrombie House in Glasgow, and I think the Foreign Secretary has just announced there are going to be, you know, 500 more jobs are going to be moving there from the Foreign Office. We also have an office in Milton Keynes, which is also possible to work in. But, you know, whenever I've been in London, I've always worked in. Whenever I've been in the UK, I've always worked in London. I think over the balance of my career, I've spent more time overseas than I have in London. And again, this comes down to a lot of it is choice. Some of it, you know, we did, normally the pattern is that you will do 2 overseas postings and then go back to the UK. We managed to do 3 because we were in Thailand and then we went to Slovakia, and Slovakia was where we job shared. And so then, you know, we went to Zambia after that, and that was my second overseas tour. So we did 12 years overseas, which was quite unusual. So yes, I've done far more overseas than I have in London. Some people, you know, it will be the other way around. Some people are much more focused on wanting to be at the centre of where all the decision making is done here in London, and see the opportunities there. I've always been very keen to be out and about in the field, and so that's what I've ended up doing.
And it sounds like the questions are carrying on in that vein. When you are, you know, and you've, as we said, you've been lucky enough to be in all these different locations. What's the split between sort of, in inverted commas, office work in these lovely countries? And I think they really want to know, how many events are you going to?
Yeah, it depends how you define events, really. I mean, there are all sorts of different events. There are, you know, conferences, there are, you know, meetings with other people outside the office. I mean, I think you know, again, a lot of it depends on where you are, where you're working, and what your role is. You know, I have been very fortunate in my last few jobs, you know, as the role as an ambassador or a high commissioner is to be out and about, meeting people, being seen, being active. So there's much more, you know, being out than being inside the office. And you know, as I say, on the events, you know, there are all sorts of events. They could be, you know, meetings in ministries or meetings with companies, or you know, sort of lunches and dinners and, you know, receptions and cocktail parties. But, you know, all these events are being done for a purpose. You know, you are not, you know, you do not go to such and such an event because you think it's going to be a good time and the wine's going to be good. Invariably, the wine is not going to be good. But you know, there will be an opportunity to meet lots of different people. Some people you will go to an event because you know that certain people will be there, and you'll be able to have, you know, sort of 5 or 10 minutes with them to talk about X or Y. Other times you will go to an event because you think you might meet some interesting people. And I think, you know, that's been one of the particular difficulties about the last year, when we've all spent all our lives on, you know, on Zoom. Yes, there have been huge advantages. You know, we're able to do this meeting now with, you know, 155 people online, and none of us have had to set foot outside our front door. But, you know, the flip side of that is that, you know, you don't get any of those personal connections. And, you know, if I'd been fortunate enough to be able to travel to Keele, as well as being able to, you know, I'd have a much better sense of, you know, what the audience looks like, you know, how gender diverse and, you know, other diverse aspects there are of this particular audience, you know, would be more visible to me, conscious that not all diversity is visible. But I would, you know, I would also have had the opportunity to, you know, have, you know, personal conversations with people, which I'm not able to do. But the flip side is we've got a much bigger reach. And I suppose my point is that, you know, even now, with all the advantages that technology has brought us, there's still a lot of emphasis on personal contact and personal communication. And I think, you know, all of us, while we recognise the benefits of technology, are probably all really looking forward to actually being able to get together with people. And all our, you know, sort of, I certainly know that the highlights of my year last year did not involve a screen. You know, they involve being with people, sharing, you know, moments and meals and those sorts of things. And I think that sort of personal connection is very important.
And must be so important to be for a diplomat as well. I'm going to slightly tailor the next few questions because they seem to all be very interested about salaries and how much you can earn. I'm going to just, luckily there's a few that take it in a slightly different direction. Are salaries dependent on, I'm guessing they're not going to be dependent on gender, as one question was asked, but are they dependent on locations? So if you are in Guatemala versus, say, Thailand, as 2 locations you've worked in?
Your salary does not vary. Your salary will be the same. What will vary are the allowances you will get, which are paid to you to reflect what the cost of living is in that particular country. So that's the one thing that would vary. You know, I would say, you know, at the end of the day, we are civil servants. Civil servants, you know, you do not go into the civil service if you want to get rich. And, you know, if you want a job that's paying a very large salary, then, you know, do not join the civil service. If you want a job that will give you huge personal and professional satisfaction, and a wide range of opportunity and experience, then yes, the Foreign Office is definitely for you.
Have you ever had any, well, I'm going to try that again in English. When you've been on any of your assignments, have you ever encountered a situation where culturally there's been quite a heavy clash between your own views and perhaps the views that you have to represent?
I don't know about heavy clash. I mean, there have been differences, quite a few differences. When I was in Guatemala, the British government took a very different view of various actions of the Guatemalan government around a UN-backed anti-corruption commission. So yes, I mean, there were, but the important thing is to be able to express those differences whilst maintaining relations. And I think, generally realizing that it's always much better to engage and talk to people than simply to, shut the door or start name calling or, close down the avenues of communication. You need to be able to be, in the room with people to have those discussions about where your differences lie. And I think generally we have been able to do that.
Taking the, our I suppose stereotypical image, and we shouldn't have stereotypes, but the stereotypical image of the diplomat is very much the sort of the lone wolf, if you will. Can you perhaps give us a bit better picture of how much it's involved around perhaps teamwork or even opportunities to lead smaller teams within the role?
I mean, I think I would say that the diplomat is very definitely not a lone wolf. Nothing has ever been achieved in diplomacy by one person. Everything is a team effort, and you might be the fortunate person who's heading a team at the time, a positive development or change is made, but generally that's because of the work of a lot of other people beforehand leading up to all of that, which has made that situation possible. So I think teamwork is a really important part of Foreign Office working. And embassies are great teams because they are they're not just Foreign Office, you don't have just sort of British diplomats and country-based staff from the particular country where you are. You also have lots of other, Whitehall government departments who might be working in that particular embassy or High Commission, the Department of International Trade, you might have people from the National Crime Agency, people from Customs and Revenue. So, you get a wide group of people. And I think one of the best things about being a leader of that team is that you have a very diverse group of people that you're leading. So I think teamwork cannot be sort of understated. It's really, really important. And if you're not a team player, then again, it won't. This is not the career choice for you, I would say. Does that help?
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. I've only got, I think, enough time for maybe 2 more questions, so I'll try and get through it a little bit more of the material. I assure you there's many, many more questions they did pose to you, but we'll try and cover with what little time we have left. Obviously, your background has seen a lot within the trade and perhaps investment side of things. Is there perhaps more opportunities moving forward, maybe around something like new media, for example, within diplomacy? Are there more job opportunities in those areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly social media is a huge part of any diplomat's sort of arsenal these days. Every head of mission is expected to be active on social media as a way of, amplifying messages and, providing contact with the people where you're working, and also, sort of taking the temperature of the place where you are as well. So yeah, we have a big sort of digital comms team within the Foreign Office in London, and our posts overseas will have people who are, focused on sort of the media and communications angle. So there's a lot of that. There's also, science and innovation are huge growth areas as well, where we're looking to do far more with our international partners. Our embassy in Tokyo has a science and innovation team. Many of our embassies around the world that I know, I worked on the science portfolio in one of my early roles in Germany. So, there's a whole range of subjects that you can get involved in, from energy to science to trade and investment and politics or human rights. There really is, a real breadth of opportunity.
And one final question to close us out, because I'm just conscious of time for you. I won't mention Brexit, don't worry. But we can't get through without mentioning COVID. How has that changed or not, or affected you directly within your area?
Well, I think COVID's affected us in exactly the same way as it affected everybody else. From almost a year ago today, the instruction came out that we were all working from home at that particular moment, with all the sort of flights around the world also starting to be pulled and countries closing borders. The Foreign Office launched its biggest sort of crisis exercise in modern history, which I was involved in. And the team that I worked with, we were, helping British nationals get back from the Asia Pacific region. So working out whether, if there were flights, how to get information to them about flights, all that sort of thing. And we were able to do that, and by none of us sitting in the same space. Everybody was sitting on their laptop at home, doing Teams meetings, and, really having to learn very quickly how to do a very different way of working. So I think, that's what has changed. And I think, as I mentioned before, personal contact and building networks is a really important part of a diplomat's role. I think it's been easier for those people who were already out at post and who already knew people, and then could, just carry on those relationships, over a screen. I think it's been much more difficult for those people who have arrived at posts overseas during this period, and where, they're having to meet everybody, including, often all the staff of their embassy, over a Teams meeting, and may have been in post for sort of 4 months, but have still not met personally, everybody in their team. I think that is really difficult. I'm incredibly grateful that the Foreign Office had a sort of IT overhaul a few years ago, because I think if COVID had happened 5 years ago, it would have been a very different scenario, and we wouldn't have had the IT able to cope with it. But fortunately we have, and we have coped, and we have thrived. But I think we are also put a lot of emphasis within the organization around well-being, conscious that it's much more difficult for a lot of people. People have been working from home, families have been separated. As I said before, lots of my colleagues overseas, either haven't been back to see their families for a year, or they've had children, living in a different country and not sure whether they're going to be able to get back to where the rest of the family are living, or if they do, they have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine or 4 weeks in quarantine. It's an incredibly stressful environment. But there has been a real focus on actually just, being kind to your colleagues and recognizing that, yes, we are a world-class organization, but the reason that we are world-class is because of the people that we work with, and we look after those people. So I think, that's been a really important message, and that's been a message that's consistently come from the top. About the need for the focus on well-being and kindness, and just sort of taking time to acknowledge the really difficult environment in which we are all working.
And if I can sneak, and I do mean sneak because I think we're just over time, one final very quick question in. Now, we both Lorna and all the questions we've just asked you now, you've had this wonderful career. Were there any, locations or projects that you perhaps missed out on and wished, time over again, that you'd have loved to have done?
Hand on heart, no, I don't think so. I mean, I've worked in Europe, Asia, Africa, Central America. Difficult to think, what I haven't had an opportunity to do, really. I'm delighted that I'm going back to Japan for my next role. I mean, I should have said earlier that, the reason, normally when you do Japanese and the office invests a huge sum of money in you for learning Japanese, the idea is that you will go back. I had never been back beforehand because my husband is not a Japanese speaker. So we couldn't job share a job in Japan because he didn't speak Japanese. He's now retired. So I am, I'm going to Osaka as my job, not as a shared job. And this is my first chance to be able to go back to Japan. And, it's great to have that opportunity to, refresh my Japanese, go back to the country where my diplomatic career started, see how it's changed, how it's not changed. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to making the most of it. So no, I don't feel I've missed out, really.
Perfect. I mean, I'm not sure how many people will be able to make the same claim. Well, look, thank you very much for all of your answers, and of course, thank you to everyone that asked or put those questions in the chat. I'm sorry we couldn't get through all of them, but I hope that at least the majority you got an answer to tonight. So thanks again. And at that point, I'll hand back to Ahmed.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. And thanks, Carolyn and Lorna, for all your contributions. I would like to bring this event to a close now, if I may. But before I do that, I just want to just reflect quickly on what has been said. And Carolyn, really what struck me in the whole conversation is really that delicate and difficult balance between the personal and the professional life that you have to lead as a diplomat. I hadn't realized that, to be honest with you, because we think of jobs being in a foreign place or a different place as just a job you go and do, make lots of money and come back. But there's a lot in there involved that is actually quite astonishing, actually, and admirable as well. It's really interesting to see the passion as well that you have, that you go and job share with your husband and with the family, and you must have a lot of passion for this work and to be committed to it. So kudos to you, really amazing. And just one very quickly, I want to close with is, and just to plug in as the Director of International Partnerships, is study abroad, for students who are asked a lot about, experience. If you have the opportunity, please go and study abroad. I know all my colleagues really support that. It gives you a lot of experience, a lot of cultural exposure, and you come back with important life skills and languages. A lot of what's been mentioned there. So look into it. I know Keele and Regents are very supportive of study abroad opportunities. And finally, I just want to thank everybody for their time today and for attending. Really appreciate it. I want to thank Carolyn specifically and Lorna for the amazing questions and interview and session, and all my colleagues at Regents and Keele University as well. Thank you all. There's a link, a QDoBoard link, to leave Carolyn some notes of gratitude or any words you want to, not questions. I think she's had enough of questions now. I'm sure she would be more than happy, but please leave her a note in there. And again, Carolyn and Lorna, thank you so much for your time, and have a lovely evening, everybody.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. I hope we get lots of people from Keele and elsewhere applying to the Foreign Office.
Yeah.
That'd be brilliant. All right, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.